Imagine Charles Darwin, right? Just sitting there realizing there is this massive glaring hole in his theory of evolution.
Yeah, a truly fundamental mechanical flaw.
Exactly. A flaw so deep that neither the biologists nor, the physicists of his time could actually solve it. It's the kind of mystery that could honestly unravel the whole concept of how life develops.
Right. And it's wild to think that it took a book published a full century ago to propose a solution.
And written not by some laboratory scientist, but by a retired statesman. Welcome to this deep dive into a text from 1926 that, honestly, it feels like it was written for tomorrow.
It really does.
We are unpacking JC Smuts' groundbreaking book, Holism and Evolution. And our mission today is to figure out how this single work actually coined the word holism, how it predicted this crazy convergence of physics and biology, and really how it completely changed our understanding of what a whole actually is.
Right. And we also want to connect this to how it provides the foundation for the systems approach we use today. Like,
Yes.
If you're familiar with the theory of constraints, this is where it all begins.
Right. Yes. Theory of constraints is huge here.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, the context of who wrote this and when is just vital for you to understand how disruptive these ideas were.
Oh, absolutely. So JC Smuts had just spent over 18 years carrying these immense political burdens. And when a change of government in 1924 finally released him from those duties, he didn't just, retire to a quiet life.
Like most people probably would.
Right. Instead, he turned to philosophy and the absolute cutting-edge science of the 1920s to find intellectual relief. He synthesized those fields into this grand theory of the universe, introducing the concept of holism, which he derived from the Greek word holos, meaning whole.
So he literally invented the word.
He did.
Yeah.
And he defined it as the fundamental creative tendency in the universe to actually form wholes.
Which, to really grasp why that was such a radical claim, we have to look at what he was arguing against, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to set up the dominant scientific worldview of the 19th century.
The one he was trying to shatter?
Exactly. It was called mechanism. Or if we're using modern management terms, we might call it localism.
Yeah, mechanism was the absolute dogma of the Victorian age. If you look at the universe through that lens, you just see a giant, rigid clockwork machine.
Just gears turning.
Right. Everything is built on a very hard, narrow concept of cause and effect. A cause exactly equals its effect, no more, no less. And if you analyze a system mechanically, you view the parts of that system as independent, isolated pieces that just happen to be lumped together.
Okay.
The whole is treated as nothing more than the strict mathematical sum of those individual parts.
So I'm trying to visualize this. If I'm looking at the universe mechanically, it's basically a giant bucket of Lego bricks.
That's a great way to think about it.
You have, red bricks, blue bricks, yellow bricks. You dump them out. You can snap them together to build a tower. You can take them apart again. But no matter what configuration they are in, they're always just individual, unchanging Lego bricks. The tower isn't a new thing. It's just a pile of parts temporarily sitting next to each other.
Right. And the mechanical view insists those parts don't change their fundamental nature just by being in proximity to one another. And this is where we see the contrast with localism and the theory of constraints.
Oh, right. Because localism says if you manage and optimize the individual parts,
then you're optimizing the system. But TOC, the theory of constraints, proves that's false. Analyzing and managing only the parts leads to local optimization at the sheer expense of system optimization.
because the parts affect each other.
Exactly. And Smuts completely rejected that mechanical view long before TOC was formalized. He argued that a true whole transforms its parts. When elements integrate into a genuine holistic structure, they alter their very nature.
They become something else entirely.
Right. They create a synthesis that is completely new and definitively greater than the sum of its isolated pieces.
Okay, so if mechanism or localism is the bucket of unchanged Lego bricks, holism is more like baking a cake.
Oh, I like that.
Right, because you take raw ingredients, flour, sugar, raw eggs, butter. You mix them together, apply the energy of heat, and they creatively synthesize. You cannot unbake that cake to get your raw eggs and flour back.
You really can't.
The parts have fundamentally changed by becoming part of the whole.
Yeah, and Smuts illustrates this beautifully by comparing a physical mixture to a chemical compound. Like if you mix sand and iron filings in a jar, that is a physical mixture. You can easily separate them with a magnet.
They're just sitting next to each other.
Right. But if you take two gases, hydrogen and oxygen, and bond them into a chemical compound, you get water. You get a wet liquid that puts out fires created from two highly combustible gases.
Which is mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. The synthesis creates an entirely new structure with emergent properties. But, Smuts didn't just propose this as a neat philosophical metaphor. He actually set out to prove this whole-making tendency is the literal bedrock of physical reality.
Which is honestly the wildest part of this book. He doesn't start by analyzing biology or psychology to prove holism. He goes straight to the bottom floor of existence.
The absolute bottom.
He dives into the absolute bleeding-edge physics of the 1920s to show that matter itself is holistic.
Yeah. He recognized that the rigid contours of 19th century mechanical science were already dissolving. So he looked to Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity to demonstrate how the universe is structurally holistic at its core.
Because up until Einstein, space and time were viewed mechanically, right?
Right, as separate static buckets that events just happen to fall into. Space was an empty room, and time was a clock ticking on the wall, completely independent of each other.
But Smuts brings in a specific thought experiment to shatter that idea, and it requires you to picture a moving observer and a moving train. Imagine you were standing still on a platform, and a train goes whizzing by at an incredible speed.
And the mathematical physicists of the early 20th century had worked out something highly counterintuitive about that exact scenario. To a moving observer, the measurements of that train actually change depending on the speed.
Wait, literally change?
Yes, space actually contracts. The train appears physically shorter in the direction of motion. Meanwhile, time expands. The time it takes for an event to happen on that train appears longer.
It's just so hard to wrap your head around.
It is, but the math proves it. The faster the motion, the more space contracts and the more time expands. They vary together simultaneously, but in opposite directions.
Meaning you can't isolate them anymore, like the length of the train is fundamentally tied to the speed of the clock.
Exactly. Separately, space and time are just phantoms, mere abstractions we made up. In reality, they are fused into a conjoint action. They form an inseparable structural whole, the space-time continuum.
So the very fabric of reality is holistic.
Yes. And Smuts takes this proof of structural wholeness and scales it down to the very building blocks of matter, the atom.
And keep in mind, right, in the 19th century, physicists thought atoms were just tiny, dead, solid billiard balls.
Totally inert.
But Smuts points to the brand new Rutherford and Bohr models of the atom, which revealed they aren't solid at all. They're intensely active, dynamic little solar systems.
Right. They feature massive, positively charged protons in the center and tiny negative electrons orbiting them at immense velocities. And Smuts pulls a specific, staggering mathematical detail from the physics of his day to prove how holistic atoms really are.
Let's see the detail.
He looks at what happens when atoms combine. So the mass of a single free hydrogen atom was known at the time to be 1.0077. If you take 4 of those free hydrogen atoms, the mathematical sum of their mass should be roughly 4.03.
Okay, simple addition.
Right. But when those 4 atoms fuse together to form a single helium nucleus, their combined mass is exactly 4.
Wait, so a piece of the physical mass simply vanishes during the fusion?
It does. A fraction of their mass disappears the exact moment they integrate into the new whole.
And we know from Einstein where that lost mass goes. It converts into pure energy.
Exactly.
Which completely destroys the mechanical idea that matter is just dead, static stuff. If mass can become energy, then matter is actually just high-speed, densely packed energy.
Yes. Smuts defines matter as action. Because matter is structurally dynamic and full of energy, it generates what he calls fields. A physical object doesn't just abruptly end at its hard, visible boundaries. It radiates a surrounding zone of influence.
Like a magnet.
Exactly. A magnet has a magnetic field. The Earth has a gravitational field. And this concept of fields brings us to a critical transition point in the book, the colloid state of matter.
Oh, the colloids. This is where the strict boundary between chemistry and biology gets incredibly blurry, right?
It really does. So a colloid is a state of matter where minute particles of one substance are dispersed throughout another substance, like particles suspended in a liquid. Because these particles are microscopic, they expose an absolutely massive amount of surface area relative to their tiny mass.
Okay, I follow.
And these vast surface areas become incredibly active force fields. They start showing peculiar affinities. They selectively absorb certain chemical substances while completely rejecting others.
Let's make sure we can picture this. Imagine taking a solid block of magnetic metal. Only the outside of the block can attract iron. But if you grind that block into a trillion microscopic dust particles and suspend them in water,
suddenly you have a massive amount of surface area interacting with the liquid.
right, the entire jar becomes this highly reactive, selective sponge. And Smuts points out that these colloid fields act almost with a primitive kind of intelligence. Like chlorophyll in plant leaves uses these surface fields to capture sunlight and synthesize carbon dioxide into sugar.
And the enzymes in your stomach operate in this colloid state to selectively break down food.
Hold on, let me interrupt and push back on this for a second. If matter is just active energy, and atoms are fusing holistically, and these colloids are selectively grabbing nutrients, are you telling me the literal dirt in my garden or the rock sitting on my desk is alive?
Well, Smuts is very careful to clarify this exact distinction. No, a rock is not alive in the biological sense. But the impenetrable wall we've built in our minds between dead matter and living biology is an illusion.
Okay, so it's not a hard line.
No, they are on a continuum. The physical forces and chemical bonds inside that rock represent an early, crude phase of holism. Life is simply a more developed, more intensely synthesized phase of that exact same whole-making tendency.
I see.
The universe isn't a giant dead machine that accidentally caught a biological virus called life. The entire universe is fundamentally in the business of building progressive wholes.
Which perfectly bridges us to the next massive evolutionary leap. If matter and chemistry are driven by holism, what happens when we scale up to living, breathing organisms? This is where Smuts takes his whole-making theory and applies it to that glaring flaw in Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection.
Right. And we all know Darwin's concept of natural selection fundamentally changed human thought. It explained how species adapt to their environments over time.
But there was a catch.
Yeah, in the decades following Darwin, the scientific community began treating natural selection as a purely mechanical external filter. It was viewed as a statistical numbers game, a ruthless environmental hailstorm that randomly kills off the weak and leaves the strong to survive and breed.
And here's the mechanical flaw in that logic. Evolution relies on microscopic, random genetic variations over countless generations. Suppose an animal is born with a tiny, half-formed, completely useless trait.
Like a mutation.
Right. Let's say it's the very first microscopic hint of a wing, or a tiny cluster of light-sensitive cells that might one day become an eye. How does that useless, unfinished trait survive long enough for natural selection to reward it?
It wouldn't. A purely mechanical external filter would instantly wipe it out. A microscopic flap of skin doesn't help you fly away from a predator. It drains your body's energy to grow it, offering absolutely no immediate survival value.
It's an evolutionary liability. An external mechanical filter should logically eliminate that creature before it can pass the trait on. So how do we cross the gap from a useless microscopic mutation to a fully formed, advantageous organ like an eye or a wing?
And this is where Smuts introduces a brilliant concept to solve this. He calls it holistic selection. He reminds us that a variation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens inside an organism.
Right.
And an organism is, by definition, a whole. Therefore, it's the organism itself that exerts the first layer of selection. The external environment doesn't get to judge the infant variation right away. The whole organism acts as a friendly internal arbiter.
It acts as a shield.
Exactly. The whole organism throws its internal resources behind the promising variation. It coordinates its nervous system, its blood flow, and all of its other bodily functions to accommodate and protect this new change. Smuts notes that the organism carries this infant variation with the same care and integration that it uses to carry an aging, useless organ. It nurtures it internally.
Okay, I have to stop you there because this sounds dangerously close to an old, debunked evolutionary theory.
Oh, Lamarckism.
Yes. When you say the organism acts as a friendly arbiter and coordinates its resources to nurture a new trait, it sounds like the animal is consciously choosing to evolve. It sounds like the old Lamarckian idea of a giraffe stretching its neck on purpose because it wants to reach higher leaves and then magically passing that stretched neck down to its offspring. Is Smuts saying animals evolve through willpower?
Not at all, and it's a very crucial distinction to make. There is no conscious intent or willpower involved here. The proto-giraffe isn't thinking, I need a longer neck to survive. What Smuts is describing is the deep, systemic, self-regulating pressure of dynamic equilibrium.
Dynamic equilibrium. Unpack how that physically works.
Okay, think of a complex suspension bridge. If you add a heavy new weight to one side of the bridge, the cables and pillars on the opposite side automatically shift and bear more tension to keep the bridge from collapsing.
The bridge doesn't choose to do this.
Right. Its structural wholeness demands it.
Huh.
Biological bodies operate similarly but organically. A whole is constantly striving to maintain its internal balance.
Okay, that makes sense.
When a small, random variation occurs internally, say a slightly longer bone structure in the neck, it creates a new physiological tension. The whole organism automatically shifts, adjusts, and reorganizes its internal forces, its muscle growth, its blood supply, to support and integrate that new element so the body doesn't collapse. The momentum of the entire biological system gets behind the variation.
So the variation survives those vulnerable early stages because it has the backing of the entire holistic system. It gets subsidized by the whole long before it ever has to face the brutal external test of natural selection out in the wild.
Precisely. Holistic selection develops the variation internally over generations. Only much later, when the variation is mature enough to actually provide an advantage, when the wing can glide or the eye can see shapes, does natural selection take over. The inner holistic factors and the outer environmental factors of evolution are working in tandem.
So the universe isn't just ruthlessly eliminating the weak, it's actively structurally nurturing the new.
Yes. And as we follow this trajectory, we reach the most fascinating part of Smuts' theory. We've watched holism build from raw energy to chemical matter to biological animals. Where does this relentless drive toward wholeness ultimately lead?
According to the text, it leads directly to you, the listener. It culminates in human beings.
The universe evolves in very distinct progressive stages. It moves from matter to life to mind and finally to personality. Mind emerges as a specialized organ of holism. Think about how a plant or a lower animal operates. Holism works through blind biological coordination, like your immune system fighting off a virus while you sleep.
You aren't directing it.
Right. But as evolution pushes forward, that coordination eventually wakes up. It becomes conscious.
Smuts refers to the mind as the rebel of the universe, which I love. It seems to break away from the universal routine of blindly following nature and instead turns inward, focusing entirely on the individual self.
Mind individuates us. It creates a center of reference where I become the focal point of my space, my time, my unique experience. But Smuts argues this apparent rebellion is just holism gathering its forces to produce its greatest masterpiece. The highest, most complex evolutionary structure the universe has ever produced is human personality.
Why is personality considered the supreme whole? What makes it greater than, say, a complex animal brain?
Because personality represents the ultimate synthesis. Think about everything that makes you who you are. You have raw biological urges, you have social traditions and languages you've inherited, you have a lifetime of highly specific personal memories, traumas, and triumphs.
So many moving parts.
Yeah, and personality takes all of those wildly disparate elements and fuses them into a single, unique, indivisible center of experience. And because personality is such a highly evolved, tightly integrated whole, it achieves something that raw matter and lower animals cannot, which is freedom.
Freedom over mechanism. This is where the Victorian clockwork universe completely breaks down.
Exactly. If you are just a mechanical machine, you are bound by strict determinism. A stimulus hits you, and you blindly automatically react. A billiard ball is struck by a cue, and it rolls exactly where the physics dictate.
Cause and effect.
Right. But a personality operates differently. It absorbs external pressures and stimuli, brings them inside its holistic structure, metabolizes them against its memories and values, and produces a self-determined action.
You don't just react to the world, you choose your response. You create new outcomes.
You do. Smuts locates the biological and physical basis for all human ethics and freedom right here in the structure of personality.
Let's tie all of this together because the implications are just staggering. If we accept Smuts' premise, it completely rewrites how you should view your own existence. You are not a tiny, meaningless gear in a cold cosmic clock.
You're really not.
You are not a statistical accident of a random hailstorm. If the fundamental process of the universe is whole-making, then your personality is the absolute vanguard of that process. You take the chaotic, unpredictable input of the world, and you creatively spin it into your own unique identity.
The groaning and travailing of the universe through billions of years of evolution wasn't aimless. From atoms fusing into helium to cells clustering into bodies, the universe was laboring to produce the exact freedom that exists inside your mind right now. You are the universe's most advanced tool for creating meaning and structure.
It is an incredibly empowering lens through which to view human life. But as we wrap up this deep dive, applying Smuts' logic leaves me with one final, deeply provocative thought to consider.
Let's hear it.
So Smuts published this in 1926, and he stopped at human personality. He saw the individual human as the highest whole the universe had yet achieved. But if we look at the undeniable pattern of holism, well, atoms fuse to form molecules. Molecules form cells. Cells form biological bodies. Bodies form conscious personalities.
The whole always eventually becomes merely a part of a newly emerging, even greater whole.
Exactly. The progression never stops. It just scales up. So what if individual human personalities are not the end of the line? What if you and I are currently just the individual cells forming an even greater unseen whole right now?
Oh, wow.
When we look at our massive global societies or our instantaneously interconnected digital networks, are we witnessing the birth pangs of a new planetary holism? Are we just the raw ingredients synthesizing into the next great evolutionary leap, something to mull over until next time?